Hey everyone, and welcome to the Sunny Go One Piece podcast. On this episode, we're going to be diving into episodes 766 through 768, which will cover manga chapters 815 through 817. And yes, I've been waiting to get to these episodes for a while. So these episodes contain one of my all-time favorite moments and twist in One Piece. This is such an amazing moment. So yeah, get ready to have your socks knocked off with these episodes. Well, I would hope that you've already seen them before I talk to them. But anyways, synopsis. The younger half of the Straw Hats party with the Minks now that things have kind of settled down, but the more mature half of the Straw Hats keep an eye out for the samurai to make sure they don't unknowingly walk into a very tense situation, but fail because they fell asleep, and now they need to prevent them from being seen by the Minks to ensure that peace is maintained. So, differences. When Brook is walking to Peckhams' room, there's a moment where he's surrounded by all the Mink dogs, obsessing over Brook's bones again. In the manga, it immediately goes to Nekomamushi catching up to them. The other changes, there are a few more banquet scenes that weren't included in the manga, like them eating like lasagna and all that stuff. Another change that was added was Zunisha sprinkling water, creating a rainbow when Inuarashi and Nekomamushi end their long feud. This is added in the anime. I actually like this addition. It's just kind of nice. It doesn't really hurt anything or take away anything too much. And yeah, I thought it was a beautiful scene. And then there's also a couple more scenes where the Straw Hats kind of imagine what they envision a ninja to be like before they arrive upon Raizo. So those are kind of the bigger changes. So let's get into the episodes themselves. And so, yeah, to start off, Peckhams has just dropped a huge bombshell on everyone, detailing the dark side of Sanji's background that nobody would have ever expected. Luffy doesn't care about any of that as long as Sanji returns. And I love that casually he approves of Sanji getting married too, as long as he comes back. Also, that he doesn't want to become part of the Big Mom Pirates, and even just brazenly declares that Big Mom should fall under him if they ever get connected. And this causes Peckhams to freak out and slam his head into the wall behind him. And for later purposes, this is really funny too. This whole situation and this whole section makes me love Peckhams even more, especially when he warns Luffy about just who he's dealing with, and then he lifts his sunglasses to say, to him that with his tiny eyes, which both Carrot and Luffy find amusing and cute. However, at the same time, Peckhams is dead serious about how absolute Big Mom's power is, and as well as her authority are. As he explains that this wedding will happen one way or another, because if Sanji doesn't go along with it, he'll be presented with a present with the head of a person that he holds dear, whether it's one of the Straw Hats, his family back on Baratie, or even the folks on the Kamabaka Kingdom, which was a surprise to both Luffy and I think for me, the viewer and reader, since the other two things can easily be found with a little digging. But how would they have known that Sanji was sent to Momoiro Island and spent time in the Kamabaka Kingdom? However, chillingly, Peckhams notes that this is what real power is, the power of a Yonko emperor, thus confirming what we already predicted that Vito told Sanji was the threat of one of his loved ones being targeted. But I naively thought that it was just the guys back at the Baratie, but I never even considered the Straw Hats or the Kamabaka people as within that group of targets too. And yeah, this is the scary part of a Yonko, is just their immense size, network, and influence, not just their physical strength. And so, yeah, you really get a sense of like the scale difference between like a regular pirate, a Shichibukai, and now a Yonko. Like it's just on a completely different level in terms of threat and power and authority that they control. Peckhams finishes by telling them that they don't have to worry about the Straw Hats falling into the Big Mom Pirates, as this is a political marriage to merge the might of the Vinsmoke family and the Charlotte family. And when that happens, Sanji will no longer be part of the Straw Hats. This angers Luffy and he comes to the decision that he's going to go to Big Mom's tea party to get Sanji back himself. And I do really like the maturity from Luffy though, that he listened to Robin about the bigger picture, in that if he went there with the whole crew, that this would be seen as an act of war against a Yonko emperor and would drag them into a conflict with Big Mom while they're already actively fighting Kaido, another emperor, at the same time. And I feel like the old Luffy wouldn't have even really considered this and would just jump straight into attacking Big Mom, but he knows now that other people are counting on him, and that he needs to be a captain and a leader to make the best decision for those that are counting on him. With Luffy anxious to have Peckham's healed up so that they can get going to Big Mom's tea party, he runs out to get Chopper, but on his way out, he sees Zoro waiting outside, having heard the whole thing. And this is the scene I was referring to in the last podcast about the fact that despite how cold Zoro seemed about Sanji leaving, he does in fact care and is pretty concerned despite the front that he puts on. He could have chosen to join Chopper visiting Nekomamushi, but instead he chose to see Peckham's, and of course Luffy can see right through Zoro's sort of tough exterior and flat out says, "I bet you're worried about Sanji too, huh?" And I think we can take what Luffy says at face value. He is in fact concerned about Sanji, which I think is a really great moment for Zoro. So the next scene cracks me up, as I referenced a little bit ago. As the rest of the Straw Hats come over from visiting Nekomamushi, Luffy calls out to Chopper that Peckham's is in pain from whacking his head and screaming in pain when almost all of that was due to Luffy being rough with him. So he's not completely matured yet, which is pretty funny. Law eventually shows up with his crew and they get introduced to the Straw Hats, but Law only mentions that they're his crew and doesn't even bother to actually introduce them individually, to which they all get really upset about because of the disrespect from their captain. Although they introduce themselves like this is like their first time meeting Luffy, but I always thought this was weird since I figured they would have met back on Amazon Lily when they originally helped him out before the time skip with all of his injuries from Akainu just after the Paramount War. But when you go back and really pay attention to those events, it's very likely Luffy never actually got to meet many of them, or any of them really, because of course Luffy was unconscious for most of that surgery and treatment, and when he did recover, he spent most of his time inside the island where he was the only man allowed inside, and the other Heart Pirates, they had to wait on the shore behind like this huge screen of curtains. So it is very possible they never actually formally got to meet. And by the time Luffy got well, Law and the Heart Pirates had already left. And yeah, so you can kind of go back and look. All this stuff can be found between chapters 582 and 590, just before and after the Luffy Sabo Ace flashback. Luffy then drops the bombshell news on Law that Sanji has gone to Big Mom's, which of course freaks Law out because whether they like it or not, Kaido is coming after them. And it's only a matter of when, not if. And then this moment that follows that I really love because of how sweet it is, even though Law is doing his best tsundere impression, when he mentions that it's very likely that Kaido now knows they're on Zou, and when they come back, he expresses concern for the Minks. Overhearing this, all the Mink people get extremely emotional and grateful for how caring they all are, even going so far as to say, "You guys are really pirates?" And it's such a cute and wholesome moment. And this then turns into a full-blown banquet party. And I gotta say, seeing Zoro smile like this in the post-time skip era was really great because it just seems like he's been incredibly stoic this whole time, even like during like the happier moments. So I don't know, it sounds like a broken record, and I think this is pretty common across the entire fandom, but I do really miss sort of the more jovial, expressive Zoro, and so it's just kind of nice to see this every now and then. The party eventually dies down, but you kind of never notice that the three elder statespeople of the Straw Hats are not there, and everyone 30 and older have been guarding the entrance waiting for Kinemon and Kanjuro to intercept them before they inadvertently show their faces to the Minks, who so hold a massive grudge against them. But before we move on, can I just say Frankie's whale-shaped hairstyle is amazing. Probably one of his top 10 best in the series, maybe even top 5 in terms of hairstyles. Robin suggests that they should take turns keeping watch so that they don't miss them. But out of generosity, each one of them offers to take the first watch, and then they all just decide to stay up together. But unfortunately, this was a bad idea as all three of them just fall asleep at the same time by the time Kinemon and Kanjuro arrive and just let themselves into the country none the wiser. The monkey Mink, whose name we later learn in the next episode, is Barietti. He's the monkey that fell down with them and is also with them. But as soon as he hears that they're looking for Raizo, he freaks out and runs off with tears streaming down his face to warn the rest of the Minks that the samurai have arrived. And the worst has seemingly happened. The Minks are going to discover them and lead to a potential conflict, putting the Minks against the samurai with the Straw Hats caught in the middle. And I will tell you, when I was first reading this, I was genuinely on pins and needles, even though I knew that everything probably would work out in the end. But Oda has built up how much pain and suffering these people have had to endure on account of these samurai that they know nothing about, that you can't help but fear the worst. And I, for one, was very curious how they were going to navigate this. I figured someone would intercept them somehow at the last minute, but the fact that Barietti already knew it was looking very likely that the Minks would find out somehow. Now, on a side note, I love Kanjiro's animal pal drawing between Ryunosuke, Nekozaemon, and now Torasaburo. They're all amazing. As you may have guessed from the little guy's appearance, Tora means tiger. And and another translator note, when Barietti is running away, he's panicking in his head. He yells, "The samurai here!" In Japanese, he says, "Samurai de gosaru." And if you're listening, you'll probably note the similarity in the sound of that and how Kinemon and Momo talk, or any sort of samurai in sort of like a samurai period piece, like Rurouni Kenshin, for example. They often end their sentence with this old-fashioned de gozaru instead of the modern desu, which both mean like to be or is, but the monkey, if you listen carefully, says de gosaru with an S sound instead of a Z sound. So instead of gozaru, it's gosaru. And that's because saru means monkey, which you probably also know too in Japanese. And it sounds very similar to zaru. So Oda had a fun, wordplay and had him saying all of these sentences with gosaru as he's panicking about samurai, which is, again, very funny. And also on another translator's note here about the monkey's name, Barietti's name, and what that references here. So from what I can tell, that this is in reference to the word eteko, which can also mean monkey or ape, but unlike the more often used word saru, eteko is used more like when you're referring to the personification of a monkey, like Mr. Monkey or something like that, like someone who's monkey-like, I guess, or like a monkey character. But if you take this one step further, the body part of his name, I think it refers to the word barrier, kind of like Bartolomeo's buddy fruit for his barrier fruit, as in he's the gate guard or the barrier to Zou, and he would essentially be the first barrier of defense, hence he's the barrier monkey or the Bariete. So it's kind of a really like multi-layered reference to this Mink's name, which is really funny, I think, and clever. Some amount of time later, the adult trio of the Straw Hats wake up to their shock and slight confusion at a new Kanjiro drawing being present next to Ryunosuke. And this scene is pretty amusing as the three are confused at what that pathetic creature is, even, what is it even supposed to be? But Robin finds it adorably cute, of course, which is cute in and of itself, but now they've got a full-blown crisis on their hands. Bariete rings the bell to warn everyone. Now everyone is on high alert, and when I say everyone, I mean everyone. Both the day and night groups converge at the same time, regardless of their hatred of each other. Both Inuarashi and Nekomamushi converge on the city at the same time to intercept the samurai. Kinemon and Kanjuro just kind of walk through the forest, completely oblivious to the gravity of the situation, thinking that they're going to be welcomed. But their conversation here is strangely odd, as they seem to talk about the Minks as if they're very familiar with them, and that the things that they've been told about them just don't seem to match up with what they know about them. Just then, Momo finds them really coincidentally. I find it really incredibly convenient that Momo somehow found his way to them in this massive island covered with thick jungles. But, this is anime. But once both Mink forces arrive at Kurao City, there's this added tension of what will happen when the two lords of Zou come face to face, especially since the reaction of both Pedro and the other Fox Guardian freaking out. It is pretty apparent that they do not want this to happen. And I especially love the added joke of the Fox Guardian seeing Inuarashi and first freaking out and then just kind of turning away to pretend that he didn't notice him to avoid the blowback he might face from Nekomamushi. And they almost get by without them noticing until Shishilian screams in shock, bringing the two face to face with each other. And until this scene, it hadn't really sunk in just how much they hated each other. Until I saw this moment, I figured they just really didn't like each other. But seeing everyone just absolutely shit their pants at the thought of these two coming face to face really sells the idea that if they met, it would essentially result in an all-out bloodbath, like a literal death match. But while they're distracted with each other, luckily the Straw Hats do manage to catch up to Kinemon, Kanjuro, and Momo and stop them from being seen by the Minks. Then we get another slight flashback to the moments where both Inuarashi and Nekomamushi lost their respective limbs in the torturing, and both of them are some kind of strong-willed. They courageously take the brunt of the torture, redirecting it as much as they can away from their people and their soldiers. Of course, these two moments become all the more incredible when we finally get the big reveal at the end of this episode. But it's pretty amazing. And then again, knowing this and then going back and rewatching all of Zou, it makes it even worse. You feel so much worse about what Jack did. But speaking of which, things between Inuarashi and Nekomamushi get so heated that they both end up deciding to duel to the death right there on the spot. And honestly, this level of hatred for each other kind of shocked me, like I said earlier. Like, how such kind and good people they are separately. It's hard to imagine seeing these two have so much hate for each other. It really makes you wonder what the heck happened between them. And seeing this, Kinemon decides to speak up to stop them, revealing themselves to all the Minks, declaring their purpose for coming to Zou to search for Raizo, with the Straw Hats having to make the tough choice to try and step in and try and do anything to de-escalate this insanely tense situation that is about to lead to potential tragedy. Then probably one of my all-time favorite moments in the series happens. Inuarashi and Nekomamushi walk up to the trio of samurai, and instead of attacking, they plop down with tears streaming down their eyes that they have been waiting for them, bowing their heads and stating that Raizo Dono is safe. And I kid you not, this was the first time since the Laboon and Brook connection was revealed in Thriller Bark where I was left absolutely speechless and stunned. As were most of the Straw Hats in the stories and most fans who read or watched this scene. I think what really sells it, though, is that Zoro was left shocked and stunned and speechless too. Even in these types of moments, Zoro is usually still pretty stoic, but you can read it on his face too that he can't believe what he's witnessing. It's hard to even really put into words how incredible this moment was when I first read it. It caught me so and completely off guard, and I had chills just staring at this page for the first time when I read it. Easily one of the greatest moments in the entire series. The Raizo is safe moment is up there in terms of the all-time great One Piece moments. The bombardment of emotions you get when seeing this is incredible because all the emotions that you see every character displaying on the page or on the screen, you feel them all. Between the shock and chills you see on the faces of like Zoro and Robin's face, or Usopp's over-the-top almost angry reaction at being kind of deceived, to Nami and Frankie's tear-filled like moment. And I swear, for like 5 minutes, you're just sitting there trying to process all of this while also dealing with this flood of emotions. Like, it's just an incredible scene. It's so amazing. And because just like with Oda now, in retrospect, when you watch everything that led up to this moment, it amplifies the flashback that much more. The flashback of them so courageously and adamantly denying that Raizo is there at the cost of not just their lives, but the survival of their entire race is wild. Inuarashi and Nekomamushi straight-faced lying to Jack while willingly giving up their limbs is just mind-blowing. The fact that the entire community was in on this is also incredible. Like, not a single one of them ratted them out. They were all ready to suffer and die to protect Raizo. Like, every single, just the regular citizens, the soldiers, and Inuarashi and Nekomamushi, like, every level, they were all in on it and all respected it. It's almost unimaginable. Like, Luffy's agape shocked look going to the biggest smile says it all. These guys are amazing. And I can't watch this scene without tearing up, ever. Every time I watch this scene, I always tear up. Even now, knowing what's coming, this moment still hits insanely hard because the build-up and the storytelling is just done to perfection. Now, between this moment at the beginning of episode 768, just as most had predicted, since Oda never kills anyone, but it is revealed that Jack is very much alive still, but somehow injured, which is quite the feat considering the whole Mink warriors could barely touch Jack. But again, considering who he was trying to take on in Sengoku, Fujitora, and Tsuru, he didn't really stand much of a chance. Like, it's pretty crazy. Although it's not explained to us what he's up to, but he's being shown again. And so that fact could easily be predicted that he may be going back to Zou to finish that mission of finding Raizo. And this is the point in the arc where a crap ton of lore and exposition gets dumped on us. It's like a fire hose to the mouth. It's insane how much is revealed in Zou. Zou is definitely one of those arcs that's like mainly there for exposition. And there is so much to take in this, remaining part of this trio of episodes, as well as the next several episodes that come after this. But first of all, Kinemon and the samurai have an incredibly deep relationship with the Minks, and that they all serve the Kohosuki clan on Wano. Not only that, but Inuarashi and Nekomamushi apparently bear the same crest on their body, making them also part of the Kohosuki clan, as well according to Wanda and Carrot. And while getting reacquainted with each other, Nekomamushi and Inuarashi get into another heated argument over who's talking to Kinemon. Then yet another surprising turn of events occurs as Momo screams out at both of them in anguish that he can't stand the fact that they are at each other's throats when he knew them as being the best of friends. Then they all begin to drop many pieces of information that start to make your head spin a little bit. First off, Nekomamushi and Inuarashi realize how much this is affecting Momo and bow their heads into a dogeza and refer to him as Momonosuke-sama. And we've mentioned in the past, several episodes, how meaningful a dogeza is and is reserved for the utmost sign of respect or deep forgiveness or regret. And in this case, seeing two rulers basically bow their heads in a dogeza is shocking to everyone because no one should be above the rulers or dukes, which surprises all the Minks. And it is then revealed that Momonosuke's full name is Kozuki Momonosuke, and he is the heir of Kozuki Oden, the daimyo of Kuri. Kuri is a territory or a city in Wano. Now, a daimyo is a powerful feudal lord in Japan from the 10th to mid-19th century that governs, large, private, hereditary land holdings and command a private army of samurai armies. And as the subordinate territorial magnates to the shogun and the emperor, they were key figures in Japan's social, political, and military structure. So in essence, Momo is a noble in the land of Wano and kind of similar to royalty, making Momo our first sort of prince that the Straw Hats are protecting rather than a princess. And true to form, the first thing Nami does with this newfound information is to make sure that there's a pathway to acquiring money, just like she did with Vivi when they first met her. But with the reemergence of Momonosuke, they finally put their differences aside for the sake of him and decide to finally end their feud, bringing delight to every Mink. Now that things have kind of begun to clear up a bit, they now make their way to the ninja that has been the focus of everything. And while everyone is all excited about being able to meet a real-life ninja, Momo is having trouble and is feeling a little sick because he keeps hearing voices and they're getting louder the further up the whale they go. Or up the whale tree, I should say. This is actually the real reason why Momo was holed up in that room the entire time. And even earlier when he ran into Kinemon and Kanjuro in the forest, he mentions that he hasn't really felt at ease ever since stepping foot on Zou. And at first you think he's referring to just how hostile everyone is towards samurai, But it's actually something else entirely, and it was to make us think he was hiding from the Minks to avoid being caught because he's a samurai. But in reality, he was feeling really ill because of these voices. And one thing I love about Oda is that if you go back and pay attention, the clues were all there for all of these reveals. Although very subtle, particularly the conversation that Kinemon and Kanjuro have as they're walking through the forest as the bells are ringing, they first think that the bells are there to welcome them because they're actually very familiar with the Minks. And in fact, they're basically like brothers and don't see why they would be hostile towards them. But we're meant to think that they're just oblivious. And secondly, they talk about what Law told them about the reputation as, Minks being human haters. It seems strange to them, and they wonder if that's a more recent development, meaning that they only know the Minks as being friendly because they were friends with and allies with them in the past. But yeah, there's another aspect to this that's being foreshadowed and hidden in this dialogue that has yet to be revealed. So I won't really get into that, but it is really fun to like go back and basically reread or rewatch like all of Zou with all of this knowledge in mind. And it gets even better once you actually once you've read all of Wano and you get the entire context. Because yeah, all the clues are there. Like none of the things that Oda actually puts in is just pulled out of thin air. At least most of it, anyways. I think there are some things that he did change along the way, but for the most part, he sets things up really well. Now, as they enter the whale tree and get closer to Raizo, they get more and more excited to see a real ninja and are expecting something really cool looking like your traditional ninja, but instead they're incredibly shocked and disappointed to find someone that looks not at all what they were expecting. And truth be told, I personally was kind of shocked to see what Raizo's final design was too. He was nothing like I had expected, and for a lack of a better way of putting it, he looks weird. He looks weirdly proportioned with a massive head and brightly colored clothes. Not at all what I don't think anyone expected, even the characters in the story or us the fans. And I think we were all expecting something akin to what the Straw Hats were imagining, with the dark clothes and the cool, slick ninja. Or something like Naruto characters, given the series' close relationship to Naruto. But it turns out to be neither, and is another example of Oda just trolling us with his amazing imagination and crazy sense of humor. it's just, Raizo is crazy. Like, I remember just thinking, what? This is the ninja? He looks so weird. But trust me, Raizo gets really cool. Despite this, Raizo seems like a good dude, as his only lines of dialogue, at least in these episodes, is his anguish over the fact that the Mink people were hurt while keeping him safe and hidden, when he'd rather turn himself over than see people hurt. So they've had him chained up to make sure that he does not go anywhere, to hopefully maintain and uphold their promise. And he is properly introduced as Raizo of the Mist, which is quite honestly a badass epithet. But the craziest thing about the end of this episode is actually what's sitting behind Raizo. And it's easy to miss because it's like a split second and your attention is all on Raizo's ridiculous look and it flashes by in an instant. But he's chained to a poneglyph. And not just any poneglyph, but a red one, which is something we haven't seen in the series at all. They've all been gray stones. And in the manga, it's not as big of a deal that it happens here because the chapter actually continues on. But for anime fans, the episode actually just ends there. And so, yeah, you're left on this huge cliffhanger of now you're introduced to a ninja, but now there's a red poneglyph sitting right behind him. And so, yeah, a ton of crazy things are going on here. And it's about to get even crazier. We haven't even talked about the Kozuki clan crest and its similarities to other symbology in the series, which I'll get into in the next podcast episode, which I can't wait to talk about. However, in the next episode, I will actually be taking a slight detour to give my thoughts and review on Season 2 of the Netflix live-action series. So definitely look forward to that, and then we'll get back into Zou. But yeah, that's where we'll end it here. If you did enjoy this, send me a like or comment. I really appreciate it, and it helps. And if you want to join me on this journey of rewatching One Piece, please consider subscribing. Check out my Instagram at SunnyGo Podcast for updates and pictures of my manga collection and card collection. And as always, I wanted to thank you for taking the time out to listen to my podcast. Yeah, definitely a kind of a spoiler section here that I wanted to talk about a few things. But stay safe out there if you're not interested in any of that. And I hope to see you on the next episode. Bye. All right, so obviously I'm not going to get too much into like a lot of the Wano connection stuff because we're going to go over that eventually. But I think the two things that kind of stand out here that allude to things that are revealed in the future. I think one of the coolest things that I didn't even realize until I did this rewatch for this particular podcast was if you look closely at Luffy when Nekomamushi crashes into Luffy and Zoro, he's on the ground while Luffy is mentioning how fluffy he is. Luffy is actually doing the Nika dance there. And also, he's doing the Nika dance during the banquet too, which I have to imagine that is intentional, considering the connection between the Minks, the Wano crew, and what happens in Wano. And so, yeah, I cannot think that that's not intentional, and I think it's pretty cool seeing that. The other thing is all the hints to time traveling. So this is one of those things where I often, like, when I rewatch or reread One Piece and think to myself, like, oh my god, how did I miss all this? So the way Kinemon, Nekomamushi, and Inuarashi all talk about each other's current state, you can definitely pick up on that. They've been waiting for a long time, but the ages don't match up. You know, Kinemon seems far too young. Momonosuke clearly is too young to have even been alive during that time, but he still seems to remember things or references things that doesn't make sense timeline-wise. And another line of dialogue that you can kind of pick up on in hindsight that is a clear sign that time travel has occurred is how Nekomamushi says to Inuarashi that only a few months should have passed, yet being with the Straw Hats, they're cheering Momo up, which again doesn't line up with the events when you really sit there and think about it. And now that we know from Momo's perspective, the events of Wano and his father's execution only happened a few months ago by their calculation, but to them, it's been more than 20 years. And so, yeah, like when you really think about it, it doesn't make sense the way they're talking about all of this, how they knew Roger and all of that stuff. And all the hints to time travel were there. And I don't know about you all, but I certainly didn't pick up on it. I never even thought about it until they got to Wano. That's when I started to really think like, something doesn't feel right. And so, yeah, it was going back in hindsight and seeing all of this, it really is like, man, I'm an idiot. How did I not pick up on these? And so it's really fun to go back and actually reread or rewatch the Zou arc, especially after having finished Wano and seeing all this and seeing like, oh, Oda did really write it in a way where, yeah, all of these hints are there. You can pick up on them, and it still makes absolute sense that all of these things that he reveals in Wano make sense, including Kanjuro's betrayal as well. And so, yeah, I again, it's really fun to go back and rewatch One Piece in its entirety because of all these like references, callbacks, or foreshadows, and sort of setups that he does. So, yeah, I think that's kind of all I really wanted to talk about in the spoiler section. So, thanks for listening. And I will catch you on the next episode. See ya.